Welcome. Thank you for joining me for today's video. The two mysteries that we will be examining today have multiple twists and turns and could easily be confused as a plot from a Hollywood movie. Our first mystery analyzes the odd circumstances surrounding the death of crime author Eugene Izzy. The YouTube channel Lost Case was kind enough to accept my invitation and join us as our special guest narrating this first mystery. Our second case takes us to America's heartland in Oklahoma. We will be exploring the strange facts regarding the auto accident that killed nuclear plant worker and union activist Karen Silkwood. With that being said, let's get into it.
Eugene Izzy was born in the south side of Chicago on the 23rd of March 1953. Izzy's father was in and out of prison and was a full-blown alcoholic, so it's of little surprise that Eugene had a troubled childhood. He never caused any major issues, but was very rebellious and always seemed to find himself in trouble. There was always one major thing that Izzy had helped him escape as a child: books. He loved crime and mystery stories, and had the dream of one day becoming an author himself. Izzy would go on to drop out of high school in his teenage years, opting instead to join the United States Army. While in the Army, Izzy would go on to finish his high school equivalency exam, or what is known today as his GED. After his service time was up, he returned back to the south side of Chicago. He began working at a steel mill, but always maintained his dream of writing. During this time, he began drinking too much and shortly found himself to be an alcoholic, just like his father. With the help of his wife, he overcame his addiction and finally saw his first book published. He would go on to have a very successful career as a crime author. On the afternoon of the 7th of December 1996, Eugene Izzy would find himself at the centre of a mystery that could have been part of one of his crime novels. Izzy had a writing office off of Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago. A man passing by the office looked up and saw a man hanging by his neck outside the window of the 14th floor. The man hanging was Eugene Izzy. When investigators entered Izzy's office, they were confronted with a scene that could have been straight out of a mystery novel. First, they saw a loaded .38 lying on the floor. The gun had not been fired. Izzy had begun to carry the gun at all times a few months earlier, due to the threats he had been receiving, which we will examine the threats shortly. The officers brought Eugene back in through the window and removed the rope around his neck that was attached to the steel writing desk in his office. They found that Izzy was wearing a bulletproof vest. The officers also found several odd things in his pockets. He had $481 cash, notes documenting death threats he had been receiving, brass knuckles, a can of disarming spray. The spray will be equivalent to pepper spray, and 3 computer disks that contained a manuscript of a novel he was working on. As you can see, Eugene Izzy did not appear to be preparing to take his own life. However, the medical examiner will go on to rule his death a suicide. Izzy's friends and family had a major issue at this conclusion, and they claimed to have a strong theory regarding who would have wanted to have taken his life. Eugene had been investigating a radical racist militia from the state of Indiana. He was collecting information to use on an upcoming story that he was going to write. Although his research was for his novel, Izzy found the militia so troubling, he wrote a letter regarding them to the Chicago Tribune. The paper never published anything regarding Izzy's investigation. Izzy was receiving verified death threats from members of the militia, and according to his loved ones, he was terrified. This was the reason that he began to wear a bulletproof vest and carry a .38 handgun. Izzy had shared several voicemails with his friend Bob Rice, who was a retired police detective. Rice would later say that the threats were 100% real, and on one of the voicemails a female says, "You'll be hanged by the end of the year." Although the police ruled foul play out in this case, it's extremely hard to look at the death of Eugene Izzy and not see mystery with many unanswered questions.
Karen Silkwood was a plutonium lab technician at Oklahoma's energy giant Kerr-McGee Corporation.
Workers were contaminated over and over and over again, and nobody told them about cancer. They said they didn't know about cancer till they read about it in the newspaper during the trial. There's no question about the fact that they're going to die. One man said that he thought he was contaminated on an average of twice a week for 4 years while he worked there. 19-year-old people who came in were contaminated within 1 or 2 days after they started work. They painted over the contamination. They didn't decontaminate desks, walls, floors. They just painted it over with white paint in order to hurry up and get the production back online.
Karen Silkwood was born in Longview, Texas on February 19, 1946. She had always been very dedicated to the work that she was involved in growing up, and this would carry on in her life as she grew into an adult. Karen attended Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas, where she studied medical technology. After university, Karen married, but due to an unfaithful and overspending spouse, she would find herself divorced early in the 1970s. After her divorce was finalized, Karen decided that she needed a change, so she moved from Texas to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. She briefly worked for a hospital once moving, but she would eventually find her place as a nuclear power plant technician at Kerr-McGee Cimarron Fuel Fabrication in Crescent, Oklahoma. In 1972, Karen Silkwood became the first female to be elected to serve on the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Work Union's bargaining committee. Her role as an elected union official was to oversee health and safety regulations of the power plant where she worked. She took her position with the union very seriously and made a commitment to herself and to her fellow workers that she would bring to light any issues regarding the plant and the health and safety of its workers. When Karen began examining how the nuclear power plant had handled the health and safety of her peers, she was astonished. She found that the nuclear plant was in violation of many codes and rules that had been put in place for the safety of the workers. The Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Work Union would go on to release an official statement saying, "The Kerr-McGee plant had manufactured faulty fuel rods, falsified product inspection records, and risked employee safety." Needless to say, the relationship that Karen had with her employers at the power plant had begun to grow tense. Karen Silkwood was not going to be intimidated by the large corporation that she worked for, and in 1974, she found herself giving testimony before the Atomic Energy Commission. She would tell the commission that she and other workers had faced contamination at the plant due to safety standards being lowered so that the rate of production could be increased. It was not long after she gave her testimony before the AEC that Karen discovered that she would test positive for extremely high levels of plutonium. Plutonium is a very dangerous chemical that is produced to be used as fuel for nuclear reactors to produce energy. The immediate effects of plutonium poisoning can sometimes be negligent, but the long-term ramifications are quite severe. The ingestion of plutonium, either by inhaling or swallowing, is extremely carcinogenic to the human body. On that day, November 5th, 1974, Karen's fears of what the plant was exposing its workers to became very real. The test results showed that Karen had 400 times the legal limit of plutonium in her system. The medical staff at the plant sent Karen home immediately. She was given containers to take samples of her urine and feces so that her radiation levels could be further tracked. Before Karen left to go home, she tested her gear and found that there were high levels of plutonium inside her gloves. However, there were no holes or tears in her gloves, so she had to have been exposed to the dangerous chemical some other way. The test showed that she had both ingested it through her mouth and inhaled the plutonium. According to Karen, there was no possible way for that to have happened. Karen's home would be tested, and several of her items in her home had high levels of the chemical as well. Her home would be decontaminated, and numerous things from her home had to be outright destroyed due to the high levels of exposure. At this point, Karen had had enough. She decided that she was going to take her findings to the media. She scheduled a secret meeting with New York Times journalist David Burnham. The meeting was to take place on the evening of November 13th, 1974. Karen had a union meeting that day at a local cafe in Crescent, where several of her colleagues confirmed that they saw Karen carrying a large file of some sort with her. The file contained all of the evidence that she had gathered against the nuclear power plant and documentation of the plant's violations. She left the union meeting that evening en route to her meeting with the journalist Burnham, 30 miles away at Union headquarters in Oklahoma City. Tragically, Karen Silkwood would not make it to her meeting with Mr. Burnham. She was discovered later that evening in her 1974 Honda Civic. It appeared that she had ran off the road and run into a culvert. The responding state trooper stated that he found a couple of the sedative tablets Quaalude. However, the trooper stated that there was no file inside Karen's car. Karen's family had seen Karen with the file when she left home, and as stated previously, her fellow union members had seen her carrying the folder after the union meeting at the cafe. Her car had damage to the rear end, appearing that someone had rear-ended her, pushing her car off the road that evening. Many people subscribed to the theory that her employer had hired someone to cause Karen to run off the road that November night. Investigators would go on to say that Karen had fallen asleep at the wheel and just driven off the road by accident. Karen Silkwood's family would file a civil case against Kerr McGee Cimarron Fuel Fabrication. A jury in the civil suit would find that Karen had been pushed off the road that evening, initially awarding the family over $10 million. After several appeals, the family would eventually settle out of court for $1.38 million. Both of the cases that we examined today have several mysterious circumstances surrounding them. Whether something sinister was afoot in these two deaths can be debated, but the sorrow that both Eugene Izzy and Karen Silkwood's families have faced is all too real. The speculation surrounding their deaths is tragic, and we can only hope that their families have and will continue to have peace after losing their loved ones. Thank you so much for joining me today for another video. A very special thanks goes out to Lost Case for narrating Eugene's story for us today. If you haven't subbed to his channel yet, I will leave a link in the description for you. Like always, please like, subscribe, share, and post a comment. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any of the channel's content. Until the next one.